Hello again, and welcome to the Price and Value Journey. I'm John Ray, and today we're diving into a crucial topic for solo and small firm professional service providers, risk management, and more specifically, the risk you don't see coming. My guest is my friend Mike Blake. He's the CEO of High Score Strategies, a consultancy that helps business owners understand the true value of their businesses and particularly of their intangible assets. Mike has spent over 20 years in valuation and 8 years in venture capital and investment banking. And I dare say a lot of those 8 years were valuation in some form or fashion. So let's just call it about 30 years, 3 decades in valuation, okay? But he's been advising firms on their acquisition, capital raising, succession planning, much more. He's a sought-after expert in risk analysis, financial modeling, and business valuation, teaching at Georgia Tech and serving also on the board of the Business Valuation Institute of the UK. For professional service providers, the biggest risk often aren't the ones on a balance sheet. They're in client selection and mix, reputation, pricing, and even the way you think about your revenue. And Mike is here to help us uncover those risks and, more importantly, learn how to mitigate them and make better business decisions. Mike, thank you for joining me.
John, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here, and I like the new digs.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just have to say about one thing about Mike before we get started. I was honored to be Mike's producer on 178 episodes of Decision Vision that he did under the auspices of Brady Ware. Not many people make it 178 episodes and doing a weekly show. They may do a monthly show for 178 episodes, but not weekly.
Yeah, and I don't know how I made it to the 170, and I'm not sure I'd recommend that to everybody, but it would have been a lot shorter if you hadn't been the producer. So I appreciate the partnership, and it's fun to do the reunion tour, at least for one night only.
Well, absolutely. The cool thing about that is I got a front row seat to learn from you and all your guests, and that's what made it special for me. And to hear from you for 178 times was gold. So thank you. And folks, that's still out there if you want to check out Mike and what he offers to the world through that show. But Mike, you specialize in valuation, risk management strategy. So let's narrow that into small professional services firms that sell their expertise. What are those risks that they don't see coming?
Small professional firms are hybrids. They're businesses, and they're also high-stress, high-risk jobs. And so for good or ill, you get the best of both worlds and you get the worst of both worlds. And I say that being myself in that position. I've been a sole practitioner, well, in a small team, but a small expertise-based firm for about 18 months now. And I live those every day. So I'm going to talk to you less as a business appraiser and valuation expert and more as a guy who just lives this stuff every day. And the things that I live with every day are including, but not limited to, the following. One is revenue. Small expertise-driven firms always need to be on the hunt for revenue, and anybody who's been in business for more than 90 seconds understands that. And while some of us have what might be considered true recurring revenue, where you get somebody on a retainer that's paying you every month, and maybe they can't get out for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. For most of us, it's month to month, and for many of us, even the things we think are recurring revenue really aren't. They're revenue that happens to recur, but it's not recurring revenue, and those are a little bit different. So right. That's number one. Number two is the risk of execution. In my firm, when something goes wrong, there's nobody for me to look back to or to the side and say, what the heck happened here? It's me at the opera, me. And a lot of risk management has to go into making sure that your deliverable is what you want it to be and that it represents the very best that you can be in the marketplace, which also means on the opposite side of this is that I carry malpractice insurance. Knock on wood, I have never had call upon that malpractice insurance, but I think it's important that you have it, and it's not cheap. But the fact of the matter is that mistakes occur. And even if mistakes don't occur, let's face it, in the American legal system, all you need to be landed in court is an attorney that's willing to take the case and a judge that's willing to hear it. And even if
and there are a lot of those.
And there are plenty of those. I'll tell you, I do not miss that about the U.S.,
Well.
having moved abroad. But anyway, but still my clients are here, so I have to be mindful of that. And then there's a third risk now that many firms are becoming intimately acquainted with, which is concentration risk. And I don't. If you're a small professional expertise firm and your primary customer is the U.S. government or is a contractor to the U.S. government, I honestly don't know what you do. I really don't. If this show is going to be about that, we're going to have to be here for a very long time because the answer was to diversify from that 5 years ago. And unless you have a time machine, it's somebody smarter than me's got to come on. But I've run into many companies that fall into the siren song of the one big whale customer. And even a small businessman, you advise them on pricing. You know the drill.
Right.
You think, this is so great. I got this person, they're going to pay 60% of my monthly nut, and they're going to do it for months. And it's going to take them a while to ramp up. And then once they're in, they're going to love us. And then that's all great until the music stops. And it's often not because they've become unhappy with their firm. It's just because time goes on and the person who brought you on retires. The business is sold. A possibly insane oligarch billionaire comes in and takes over the U.S. government.
Yeah.
But that's never going to happen. So,
right. A black swan we'll never see.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So who knows what's going to happen? And then the other black swan risks. Whoever thought we were going to have a 1919 style pandemic? In our lifetimes,
right?
Until we did,
right? And
those are all risks that, and I'm sure there are others, but I'm putting your audience to sleep. But those are the kinds of risks that I think about every day. That I feel that it's my job as a fiduciary to myself and my family that I've got to make sure that I'm managing.
So not everybody fits this category of their primary or sole client being the U.S. government, but it seems to me a lot of people fit the metaphor. And what I mean by that is they have too much client risk and can't see it. Too much concentration risk, I should say, and cannot see it. Yep. And someone that you're pointing out, what you're pointing out here is something very important, is that when you've got someone that's governing with chaos and overhauling the entire U.S. government from A to Z, then what you thought you had in terms of diversity of clients between, let's say, NASA, then Homeland Security, then the Department of Agriculture is really not so diverse after all. And this is a metaphor for a lot of firms, not just those that work with the U.S. government, right?
No, for sure. I have, for example, had a number of clients that had Walmart as their primary retail distributor. Now, I've never interfaced with Walmart other than having shopped there. But the reputation they have, and I think they have earned to the clients with whom I have worked, is that they're the 800-pound gorilla, and they know that the 800-pound gorilla. And I have seen as many businesses fail as succeed relying on Walmart and it's not Walmart's fault, by the way. I'm not calling them out. I'm just using them as an example. Their job is to secure the best deal that they can to maximize return to their shareholders. But nobody's putting a gun to the head of the companies that are choosing to work with them. But I think those companies get all starry-eyed and they say, we're going to be on every Walmart shelf, and they think that's great. But here's the problem. Walmart's business model is not by charging premium prices for a premium shopping experience, right? That's not their superpower. And so their model requires that you accept a very modest margin. Otherwise, you're just not going to be there. And what I've seen is where those companies that have worked with a Walmart or others, I'm picking Walmart, I'm sure it's the case with other retailers, is that they don't crunch the numbers to make sure they can afford to do business with Walmart because some people can't. But you get so starry-eyed with Walmart and they're going to buy X number of units, right? The next thing you know, you've sold 1 million units and everybody on the planet has made money except you.
And what it seems to me that, and again, I'm not picking on Walmart either because I agree with you. They're a public company and they are owned by shareholders and they're doing what's right for their shareholders in their own judgment. But it seems to me what firms are doing by not understanding their customer and the risk of taking on that client is where that will end up going, because it's not just the margin you accept with Walmart, it's the margin that you end up with in 5 years, because you're under constant pressure to lower your cost, because they come back to you with a deal that you just cannot refuse and wanting you to cut your price to them.
That's right. And we had in the news, and we're getting away from professional services, so we'll boomerang back to that. But I like where this conversation is going, so we're just going to roll.
Yeah, let's keep going.
You're not familiar with this at all, are you? So in the news last week, and I posted about this on my LinkedIn feed, said we're going to reduce the number of packages we're going to deliver for Amazon. And I forget the statistics now, but I think Amazon represented 25% of UPS's business. Think UPS is not a small firm.
Right.
If you own your own 747s, you're a big company. Mm-hmm. But they said no because it's their lowest margin business. 25% of their business, but 12% of their profit, I think was the statistic. And they identified that, and Amazon wanted, of course, they wanted to do even more. And UPS said, thanks, but no thanks, because they realized quite wisely and proactively that at some point, if you are dependent upon a single customer enough, that customer owns your business. You don't. Right? It's their world. You're just living in it.
Yeah.
And UPS correctly identified that their priority needs to be freedom to operate. And you and I have talked about that a lot. It's one of my favorite terms.
Yeah.
It started to impair their freedom to, and you have a big whale client, and you have all the things that you like to do with your business. You have the things that you would like to have as values in your business, but they're 60% of your revenue. And they're helping you make sure that you make payroll fairly comfortably.
Yeah.
It's partially about the profit. Yeah, I'm not making that much profit, but then it's also, they start being mean to your employees. They start doing things in the marketplace that don't reflect well upon you and starts hurting your brand. And then you're put in a position, how much of this do I take? And many people will find that they probably take a lot more than they ordinarily would in a vacuum, because they justify it to themselves with reality. It's not purely made up, that there's such a big client, and again, they're keeping my family fed and they're feeding 4 or 5 of my employees. We can put up with them yelling at somebody every once in a while.
Yeah.
We can put up with them. Maybe they used an N-word once in anger, and maybe they won't do it again. And they're going to put the vice to us on prices, but we're still making some money. And it's because the ownership of the business eventually shifts to that customer. And that has implications for the business's value, because if you buy my thesis that customer concentration and other risks actually lead to a shift in the ownership of the business de facto, maybe not on paper, but in reality, then what do you have to sell? I'm going to use Target now because I've been beating on Walmart, and that's not fair.
Let me clarify one thing before you do that, though,
sure.
and I want to hear that. But when you say shift, you mean a values shift, right? Is that what you mean by shift in the ownership?
No,
clarify that.
Yeah, good. A shift in the value. We're sitting here in a bank, right?
Yeah.
A Renaissance bank, and there's a saying in the banking industry that if you owe the bank $1,000 and can't pay, you're in trouble. If you owe the bank $1 million and can't pay, the bank's in trouble.
Yeah.
So what happens is that if I owe the bank $1 million, I start to be able to dictate the terms of what the bank is going to get. The relationship becomes reversed. If I owe the bank $10 billion, I effectively am going to take ownership of the bank in many ways that matter, because I'm going to control it. A key customer is going to operate in the same way. If one customer accounts for 60% of your revenue, they acquire so much power, whether they use it or not, but they acquire so much leverage in what they can effectively make your company do or challenge you to make your company do, that they become, at a minimum, a part owner of the company. It's not on paper,
right?
But they can force you to make decisions that are beneficial to them and not to you as the owner. Got
it. So you were going to talk about Target and use them as an example.
I know nothing about Target, except it's a nice place. I just bought a Thunderbolt cable from them. But if Target, again, accounts for a very large portion of my revenue, and they say, do X, Y, or Z, or we're pulling the business. It could be, we've already pushed hot buttons. Let's push another one. Let's say we don't think you're DEI enough.
Mm.
We want you to be more DEI.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not making any judgment, value statement as to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but people from one side or the other. As a business owner, maybe you didn't think that DEI was an important value to your company. Was an important value to your company. It wasn't going to be up front and center the way it is for some other companies and organizations. But Target says we really need companies that are going to be working with us to be much more out front about DEI and to adopt a formal policy that they're going to publicly embrace. That could happen. It probably has happened, not with Target, but other companies.
Yeah.
As the owner of that company, what do? Do you tell Target, maybe you tell Target, this isn't a good partnership with us, and we wish you the best of luck, and we're going to have some really hard times ahead, but we're going to maintain our value system? Or do you say, it's not that big a deal?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we're going to go ahead and adopt that because Target said so. So you tell me, in that relationship, who's behaving like the owner of the company? It's not obvious. You could argue either one, is my point.
Sure.
And the second that the ownership of the company becomes unobvious, then the value of the company itself is impaired because you don't know who really owns it.
And the buyers know that if you're trying to sell that firm.
For sure.
Yeah.
They'll know it in the first 8 seconds of due diligence.
So what this leads to, it seems to me, and if we want to get back to professional services, we can. If we would want to just keep talking,
we can always rename the episode.
That's right. We'll just rename the episode. Maybe put it in a different podcast series. But what you're pointing to, it seems to me, is the lack of due diligence that the service provider or the company might do for the client, that they don't do enough due diligence on what that relationship will look like in the future, not just today, but in the future. Is that what we're talking about here?
I think we're getting there. I think we're talking about a lot of different things, which is what's really cool.
Yeah.
But what you're getting at is client due diligence. And what that really means is taking control of your firm back. Because if you serve everybody who walks through the door, no matter what, again, do you really own your firm?
Yeah.
Or do the great masses own the firm? And again, it's their world. You're just living in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll share with you my observation. In my own business, I've been a sole practitioner a couple times, and I've been an equity partner in other businesses. I can't remember a single time where I refused a client and I regretted it. I can tell you every single time I brought on a client and regretted it.
Okay.
Those become valuation Vietnams, basically. And as Nixon said, you're just trying to get out with peace, with honor.
Yeah.
At that point, I can remember every single one. And that's such an important part of risk management, because those guys, those companies take so much out of you that go beyond the finance. They take away your will to be in, they make you question why you're in business.
Can you generalize any of those circumstances? I don't want to get into the specifics, but can you generalize some of the common themes there?
I can, and I'm going to do you a little solid because I'm going to tie into your really good book.
Okay.
Which I'm halfway through, by the way. And as I said to you before, I started reading it because I thought you'd like me more. But then
I like you at the max. So you reading my book won't do anything to improve that. Okay.
Don't tell me that. But now I'm halfway through because I was generally engaged with what it is that you're writing. I'm really buying what you're selling there.
Okay. Thank you.
Clients will sometimes take advantage of your generosity. And sometimes they don't recognize generosity. Sometimes they mistake generosity for weakness and leverage. And in my cases, I've had projects that I didn't get paid enough for because I didn't stand up enough for myself to make that project financially viable. And by the way, why did I not stand up to them? Because they're a big source of my revenue.
Wow, here we go.
So there's the trauma.
It's a full circle. Yeah.
Exactly. If they were a $5,000 client, I'm like, it's easy to send them an email and say, here's the scope. But earlier in my career, where my engagement letters weren't quite so tight and I was really thrilled to have a $100,000 client, I let them get away with more. And in retrospect, I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So when I teach those things myself or try to capture those things in the valuation work that I do, I'm drawing on my own experience there. I get where you've been. I get how hard it is. But at that point, they didn't own the firm. They own me.
Right.
If I'm honest about it, they expected me to be available 24/7. I eventually put stem cells together, grew a backbone, and let them go. But not after much longer than I should have, at immense damage to my mental health, damage to my marriage, and damage to my family relationships.
Wow. And I think I asked the question of what the common characteristics of these clients are, but I think in truth, we all know them when we see them.
Don't
right?
we?
Yeah.
Don't we? When our inner voice says, yeah, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Do you look back and say, oh, I was all wrong about that? These guys were all right. I'm sure glad I ignored that little voice. It's been a happy, lucrative relationship for both of us. It'll make us happy for years to come.
So what are beyond just size of that, what that engagement and the run-on engagements, what that's going to look like for your firm and the proportion of revenue that all that represents. What else do you recommend folks be looking for?
I tell clients that one of the biggest mistakes they can make is to name the business after themselves. Now, unfortunately, under, I think, Atlanta bar rules, your law firm has to have your name in it. Can't fix that.
Yeah.
But I don't think any other industry requires that. My company's name is High Score Strategies, not Blake Advisors or Mike or Unblakeable or whatever stupid thing it might be.
Yeah.
It's High Score Strategies because ultimately the place where I would like it to be is that people are hiring high score strategies, the firm, the brand, the ethos, the personality of the firm, and not just Mike Blake. He's a guy that does valuation and value-related stuff.
And is part of that just being able to take the business anywhere you want to go and be able to pair clients with the professionals you brought in that can handle that business? Is it just a matter of succession, or is that the reason?
Succession is one of the reasons.
Okay, but it goes beyond that.
It goes beyond that because that's a way to minimize the risk or manage the risk of the company, is manage the company's dependence upon yourself as a key person. We're all waiting for the day when Warren Buffett either decides to retire or he goes to the great stock market in the sky, right? And at his age, let's face it, it's going to be sooner rather than later. Hope he lives to be 110. I'd say that's probably not going to happen. I think he'd be the first to admit that. When you read his interviews and shareholder letters, he's pretty upfront about that. And we know that he's invested a lot of time and effort into putting in a viable succession plan and make that visible to the market. There's a friendly competitor valuation firm called Mercer Capital up in Tennessee. I think it's either Memphis or Nashville. I forget.
Memphis.
Okay.
Chris Mercer.
Shout
out to Chris.
Yeah. By the way, we're one of the best books in valuation I've ever read, which is on buy-sell agreements. But anyway, he's done a fantastic job of managing succession planning with his firm, that he's made himself relatively irrelevant to the firm and has elevated people in his stead. And people still know he's there, but I think he's given his firm a fighting chance of surviving when he does leave that business entirely one way or the other. And that has implications for the exit, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about later. But he successfully created value by minimizing his role in the company so that it gave him the option, if he chose, to potentially sell it to a third partner, right? I would say the one mistake he made was to name it Mercer Capital. And he might even tell you that. I don't know. I haven't asked him. I should. But he's done everything else in terms of lifting them up in social media and having them do the publications now and talking about their accomplishments and not his accomplishments so much. And I think it's helped both make the business de-risked by reducing what we call a key person concentration. And it also makes it scalable because at the end of the day, I don't care how gifted, how energetic you are, you can't clone yourself. You can only scale yourself so far. And Elon Musk is the limit. As many misgivings as I have about him as an individual human being, he seems to have this gene where he can just work for 20 hours a day nonstop.
Yeah.
That 99.99% of us don't have.
Right.
So maybe he can clone himself or effectively do the work of 3 or 4 people, but most of us can't.
Yeah. And the Tesla is not named the Musk.
And the Tesla is not named the Musk, which is interesting, right? Because does Elon Musk strike you as a guy who's so humble that he wouldn't want something named after him?
Not at all.
No, not as such. But nevertheless, SpaceX and X and the Boring Company and Tesla, of course, and I don't know what else. But none of them are Musk.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to switch gears here and talk about something you would expect me to ask you about, which is mindsets.
Yeah.
And how mindsets play into assessing risk.
Oh, man, I love that question. So a couple of things here. I think people confuse risk management with risk minimization. Sometimes it is the same thing. On Saturday, I'm getting on a plane. I am flying from Atlanta to Lisbon via Amsterdam. I would prefer that Delta's risk posture would be that of minimization. Not optimization. I, as a passenger, I don't care about anything else other than arriving safely at my destination.
Right.
Okay. And for that kind of industry, it's appropriate. If should I ever have an operation, I want risk minimization to be the risk optimization function. I want those to be at the same point.
Right.
But for many other points in business, risk avoidance is not the same as risk management. It's just that, it's risk avoidance. And risk is one of the things that provides opportunity. That's the way our economy works. And when we see disruption, when we see uncertainty, if you can figure out the solution to that uncertainty, that's where the money is made. So in my own case, I'm making bets right now on international, and it's a risky bet for sure. I don't know if it's not going to pay off immediately. I've already screwed it up once, and I'm going to screw it up again. But every time I screw it up, that's brings me one screw up closer to getting the thing right, which I think is going to be an absolute home run. For us, I think that's important. Now, the more conventional framework of mindset with which I'm familiar, and I assume to which you're alluding, but correct me if I'm wrong, is scarcity versus a generosity, or scarcity versus growth mindset.
Certainly that, but then there's also just fear mindset, a fear-based mindset, which can be different, right?
It can, although I think fear and scarcity mindsets are very closely aligned.
Agree.
If they're not twins, then they're brothers.
Agree.
So there was an interesting study, and I read this 10 years ago. I cannot cite it now. But when I was in Leadership Atlanta, I took an interest in studying poverty. Why are people poor? And there are lots of reasons, but one of the reasons people are poor is that they're poor decision makers. But they're not poor decision makers necessarily because they're unintelligent. Poverty in itself breeds poor decision making. There are studies out there that show that when you are under duress, that your cognitive capacities decline by somewhere between 10 to 30%. So that's why you get a payday loan.
Right.
Because
exactly.
your transmission blew.
Yeah.
And the payday loan requires very few brain cycles, very few brain cells, calories to figure out. You just get it. And then you're going to work out how you're going to pay the 9 million % interest later, but you got your transmission working, so you can go back to work, you can pick up your kids, that sort of thing.
And I just got to insert here, for those that don't believe this, find a local organization that's offering a poverty simulation workshop and go do it. And you'll see this in real life for yourself because you play a simulation.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. They do these at a lot of nonprofits and other organizations to help people understand what it means to be in poverty.
Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. And the folks that, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, although I am, but the folks that are selling to people that are poor understand this. They understand the problem with decision making that these folks have. So bringing that back to professional services and how that plays out in poor decisions.
So when you're a sole practitioner, or maybe leading a small team, at least I do. I'm going to just hold myself up as an example. Right? I think one of the ways I think in terms of is, okay, am I just making enough money this month, right, to not draw out of my savings, basically?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to guard against that distorting my decision making, because if it's towards the end of the month and you're a little bit short, maybe you take on that poor decision engagement because it's going to get you that 5,000 in the door.
Yeah.
That helps you meet your goal for that month. And you're very happy when that $5,000 comes in for then in about 18 seconds.
Right.
And then after that, you're like, oh my God, what have I done?
Right.
And the next thing, you're in hell for the next 60 days paying that off.
Yeah.
And by the way, impairing your ability to get the right engagements because you're so neck high in that one. And I think that's natural. The challenge is managing the fear. Courage is not the absence of fear. The total absence of fear means you have something wrong with you. Like you have some sort of pathology where you're literally afraid. You're not afraid of a bear charging you at all. That's a dead person. You're supposed to be afraid of that.
Yeah.
It's how you manage it. And think about the United flight, the Sullenberger flight that went into the Hudson, right? We admire Sully and his crew for how they made impossible decisions in a split second with the highest stakes possible and limited options. Thankfully, for most of us, we don't have the Sully kind of scenario in front of us. But the fear mindset does stop us, I think, or can stop us from achieving what we want to achieve. You do have to recognize and move away from a risk minimization posture to a risk optimization posture where some risk is appropriate if you're being compensated enough or potentially compensated enough for taking that risk. I'll give you another example. I won't sign a non-disclosure agreement unless I'm being paid. I get all the time, in most cases, all the time I advise entrepreneurs a lot, and they want me to sign an NDA for free advice.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not signing it. And they're like, why not? I said, because I'm not being paid to assume the risk of the NDA in any way, right? So if you want my help, then only tell me things that you'd be comfortable me posting on Facebook. I'm not going to do it, but be comfortable with that. Or we got to do something else. But I'm not going to assume that risk without getting paid for it. But if you pay me, then I'll probably sign the NDA. So that's an example. I didn't minimize risk there. That's a risk management process that I take on many times a year.
I want to talk about another mindset that keeps service providers from taking the risk they ought to take, and that's imposter syndrome. The fear of taking on that client that comes along that's bigger than you've ever taken on or has different aspects that you've never worked with. You can execute the engagement, but that imposter syndrome keeps you from taking on that quote unquote risk.
If I'm being candid, imposter syndrome is not something I understand overly well. It's probably because I'm a little bit of a narcissist. But I don't know, some say narcissists
I don't believe
have the worst
that, but
imposter syndrome of any. I myself actually struggle with the notion of imposter syndrome in that scenario. Now, where I see it come up more, and I have experience of myself, is, and again, this is in your bailiwick, is I see it in pricing. It's not so much about taking on that client, but charging them $100,000 or $120,000.
Yeah.
When you should be charging them $200,000.
All right.
That's the issue. And you feel like you have to buy that business and you're discounting yourself.
Right.
That part I understand. I understand extremely well, only from having lived it. I'm not a psychologist or anything. I do think that people benefit, however they generate it, from a little bit of healthy arrogance. I'm the expert here, and I'm going to help you. But where I suspect that imposter syndrome comes is it comes from a need for external validation, or it comes from a need for permission. And I think as an entrepreneur, as part of the mindset, I think one of the things you have to let go of is a need for external validation. You're not going to get the Employee of the Year award. You're not going to get a raise or a promotion. In many cases, you may not even get a thank you from a client. Yeah. Validation is they were satisfied, they agreed the engagement was completed.
You're right.
And you weren't sued.
Yeah. And they wrote you a check and that's it.
Yeah.
It's transactional.
That's right. So if you find that you require external validation, then that's where things, I think, like mastermind groups, like peer accountability groups, or other industry groups, some place you can find a circle where you can share your wins, or even a coach, frankly. People that can help you recognize your wins, celebrate your wins. And on the opposite side, and here's something I know all too well, is when you have a setback that you don't catastrophize it. I'm the worst catastrophizer ever. I show up to an interview like this and I haven't clipped my fingernails. I'm like, we're not even on a video. And I didn't wash my hands because the main's out in my hotel. But still, I'm thinking, oh my God, I must look like Pigpen walking into this thing. And I don't.
Right.
You haven't put like a clothespin on your nose or anything. But the flip side of that imposter syndrome is a tendency to catastrophize.
Right.
When in fact, most things that go wrong aren't a catastrophe. That people like us, because we care so deeply, because our psyche, our self-worth is tied into our performance, and we define good performance as no mistakes, which, by the way, also means no risk, which is not achievable in most cases. That other part, and again, having people that you can talk to that can share your experience. You've been an entrepreneur for how long, right? Years.
Yeah.
It's a pretty darn lonely place, isn't it?
It is a very lonely place.
And it's really lonely when something doesn't go exactly the way you want to.
Exactly.
But even when things go right, it's a little lonely. You ever see For Love of the Game, the Kevin Costner movie about
absolutely.
the Detroit Tigers? And he lost the love of his life over the course of the movie. And after he pitched the perfect game at the end of his career, what did he do? He went to his hotel room, sat alone, and cried because he didn't have that person to share things with. That exact scene shows why you need to have a circle. And I think that's why, for example, Entrepreneurs Organization does so well. It provides that feedback group. A very long-winded answer that circles back to the actual question. When we talk about imposter syndrome, and I would like to put catastrophizing syndrome along with it, I think the way to, if you can't find it within yourself, then find it within people around you who can help lift you up, that have objectivity and will see you for who you really are. And will tell you it's okay to lift yourself up. And will tell you that it's okay that you had a setback. The sun's going to come up tomorrow and you're going to get up and dust yourself off and get right back in there. I think that's really important.
So we're coming down the home stretch here, and I've done what a famous podcast host I used to work with used to always say, I've thrown away the script here. And you remember those interviews?
Most of them.
Yeah, I've thrown away the script here, and I'm going ad lib because this is such a great discussion. But I do want to get to pricing and to talk about where you see risk management and pricing intersect in a services firm, in a professional services firm.
Yeah, so I think the way that I see that is that pricing is language. And when you communicate pricing, you're communicating in a language to the marketplace. When Walmart sells a bottle of water for 59 cents or whatever it is here, I don't know what a bottle of water costs here anymore, but they're communicating something to you. And on the other hand, you go someplace up market, I don't know, Nordstrom, they sell water. Let's just say that they do. And they charge $5 for a bottle of water. They're communicating something to you. Now, in a pricing scenario, it's interesting. Accountants who used to be the worst at pricing are starting to get really good at it because they don't have the staff to screw up pricing anymore. Nobody wants to be an accountant anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
What are we hearing accountants do? They're getting rid of their clients. And how are they doing that? They're raising the price. But what is that really? It's really saying, I don't think you ought to be our client anymore. Yeah. But I don't want to say that you don't want to be our client anymore. I want you to self-select. So pricing, I think, is language from a risk perspective. And pricing is communicating what your source of value is, and how you talk about pricing is language. A lesson that I learned years ago, might have been from you, I don't remember now, but let's just say it's you, why not, is you never lower your price without getting something in return. Because if you do lower, somebody says, I'd love to work with you, you quoted $12,000 for this project, can you do it for 10?
Mm-hmm.
In my own mind, I'm like, sure, I can do it. I can do it for 29 cents. I don't want to.
Right.
But if I just say, yeah, I'll do it for 10, I just telegraphed to that client that I was gouging him by $2,000. I was trying to collect $2,000 of economic rent.
Yeah.
And really that client at that point should just tell me to go F myself and walk, frankly. We'll either change the scope or I'll get some concession on terms. Instead of 50-50, I want 100% payment up front, but I'll give you a discount or some other concession. But you have to get something for it. And so I think price as a risk management tool arises from being conscious of the fact that risk is a language. And just as giving a formal statement as a firm is language, and logo is language, and branding is language, pricing is language. And if you think of it that way, I think it helps you understand how to price things. Because if you think about what you want to say, in my mind, then it becomes easier to set a price that translates what I want to say into something that happens to have a dollar sign or a euro sign in front of it.
And that price plays into ultimately reputation, right?
That's the language.
Yeah. That language is reputation, and reputation plays into valuation.
Yeah, I think so. There's one of my favorite shows is Frasier. And towards the end of the original series, there was a discussion over hiring a doula. And Frasier found a doula and Niles found a doula. And Niles says, my doula is going to cost me $5,000. And Frasier says, my doula is going to cost $15,000. She goes, and Niles goes, that sounds fantastic. Who is she?
I love that.
I got to find that clip for you.
Yeah, please. Oh my gosh. Yes. I've got to see that.
So pricing absolutely is language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Scott Boras, the baseball agent, everybody talks about him as a hard negotiator. And I'm sure that he is, but his superpower is how he translates pricing into language and back and forth. He understands, there's a reason he just does baseball and no other sport, because the language of translating the language of basketball into price and football and so forth would be entirely different. It's prohibitive for him to try to become trilingual, quadrilingual, or polyglot, right? But in baseball, he understands how to translate between those two languages apparently better than everybody else, even though fans hate him.
Yeah, and general managers hate him too.
At least in small market teams anyway. The Dodgers love him.
Oh yeah, exactly. So what advice do you give beyond what you've mentioned? Do you give service providers around their pricing and lowering their risk through pricing?
So part of it is
optimizing their risk. I didn't use the right Blakean language there, right?
I wasn't going to call you out on it, but I appreciate it.
Thank you for not calling me out.
So I think that if you are uncomfortable with having a pricing discussion, as many of us are, I'm not even as comfortable with it as I should be. I think you do a few things. One, you have maximum transparency around pricing. So put an FAQ on your website saying, here's what most of my engagements are and projects look like. And that gives you that gives your clients the opportunity to select themselves out or select themselves in. Yeah. Right. I don't know what you think of this. I'm not a guy who asks, what's your budget for a project? I don't expect anybody to answer that.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. All that does is give people an opportunity to lie.
Yeah, exactly. And there are enough of those. Yes. We don't need to hand feed and more. So I like to give opportunities to self-select. And then in the pricing discussion, I'm a little contrarian on this. A lot of conventional wisdom, I think, is talk about price very quickly in the conversation, again, for the self-selection thing. I'm a little more contrary to that, because if price is the most important thing to you, and therefore you want to cover it first, we're already not a fit. Yeah. And I have no business establishing price without establishing value. And I can't do that if I've established price the same way, price at the outset. So I think you have to think like a builder. You have to build a value case at the apex of which, or the crescendo of which, is some sort of pricing structure that is commensurate with the value.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you get pushback on the price, is it because you're not adding enough value to that person or that company that's commensurate with the price? Or are you adding things that are valuable, but just not to them?
Yeah,
You're charging them for a large pizza, but they just want a small personal pan pizza or pasta, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also a big fan of pricing with certainty, if you can. Nobody likes a meter running, and an hourly bill is almost always bad news. Almost always.
Right.
Because they're almost always surprised.
Yep.
And I've never figured out in a reasonable way how to counteract. What do? Do you send people an hourly statement every day? That seems unwieldy, but that seems to be the only way that you can truly manage expectations. And then if you do that, it gets into, you only spent 16 minutes on the phone with me versus 18 minutes on the phone. I'm like, really? I just spent more than that having this phone call with you.
But it still doesn't address the fact that clients don't know how long things take.
Yeah.
That's the basic problem.
That's right.
Yeah. They underestimate. They always underestimate that.
The hardest thing for me, I'm starting to figure it out, barely starting to figure it out, is value pricing. It's so hard because you have to learn so much about the client. I think, and you tell me, you're the expert on this, I'm not, but in my experience, I think you have to spend three times as much time in the selling process at a minimum to even attempt value pricing. Because A, you don't know what the value is actually going to be unless you spent a lot of time in the sales process. And then B, you have no idea what you're really signing up for. I can charge a value fee of $500 today. The bad news, I'm going to put 30 grand of time into it. So
Yeah, right.
the good news, I did value pricing. The bad news, I lost my shirt in it. So that's really hard.
I agree. And it's particularly hard for folks that are new in business because they don't know the questions to ask. They don't have experience doing what they're doing in real life. And therefore all that intersects into a place where it's really hard. Really hard. It's almost impossible to start out in your business doing value pricing. You've got to have a few nicks and cuts and wounds that have scarred over along the way to get to that point, it seems to me.
Have you ever read Alex Hormozy's book, $100 Million Offers?
No.
It's a fascinating book. Hormozy's a guy who built basically an empire around gym management, basically. And he's a mega influencer, Gary Vaynerchuk type.
Okay.
But he read this book, and the primary thesis is, how do you make offers that are so good that people would be stupid to turn it down? And one thing I've tinkered with in my pricing is I take a real gamble. And I'm not suggesting that you try this at home, but I've done it, where I say, I'm so confident that this valuation engagement is going to help you, that if you don't think it's going to help you, you can pay me whatever you want. You can pay me a nickel. I'm not going to pay you. I draw the line there.
Yeah.
You can pay me a nickel. You can pay me a fistful of Dave & Buster's redemption stamps so I can get myself like a fake mustache.
Yep.
Or you can pay me the full price.
Yeah.
Because what I do is so hard for people to get their heads around. And when they're faced with a transaction, they just don't know. And I haven't figured out a way to convey the value in such a convincing way.
Yeah.
Except to say, I'm going to put myself out there. I can't take a contingency fee because I won't be independent. And if I'm not independent, I'm worthless to you. But what I can do is I can stand behind this and say that if you think this whole exercise is a waste of time, then that's on me.
And what's happened in those circumstances so far?
I've never had a person do anything but pay the full amount.
Okay.
In fact, they're my quickest to pay me. They say, like, when are you going to pay? Why do I not have an invoice from you yet?
Wow. Okay.
And I think that's because when I do that, I'm measuring character too.
Yeah, right.
Which is a qualitative judgment. But this is where I don't have imposter syndrome. I know I can help people because I have, and I know what's happened to people when they sell their business without understanding the value. It's a disaster. Either they sell it for half of what they should have, or they don't sell it at all and they die with the damn thing. neither one of which is a good outcome. That's a radical approach to pricing, but it was inspired by Hormozy because it really is an offer that's so good, it's stupid to turn it down.
Wow. I could keep going. And there's, it's not that we've left stuff on the cutting room floor. We haven't gotten out to the set yet to even film. But
stay tuned for part 2.
Yeah, we're going to have to do part 2 because I had a bunch of questions for you. We'll have to do a whole show if you've got the time sometime on the IP that comes with a professional services firm and developing IP and value out of that IP. That's a whole show.
For sure.
Particularly the way we talk, right? We go at the buddy trails. We keep going down.
I'll even give you the teaser. Lots of professional services firms have 6- and 7-figure value of IP that they're just sitting on and don't know it. It's criminal how much they're not using the IP they already have.
I think you gave a great teaser for that episode.
Well, you better have me on again.
I know it. I'm going to snip that and put that out to tease the next episode with Mike Blake of High Score Strategies. Wow, Mike, what a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me and for not turning off the microphone. I appreciate it.
Before we let you go, though, I want you to just talk a little bit more about your firm and how you specifically help folks and contact information for those that would like to be in touch.
Yeah, sure. So High Score Strategies is at its core a boutique valuation and strategic advisory firm. And we help our clients win their best decision or their most optimal or most important decisions. Whether that's buying a business, selling your business, investing, bringing in a business partner, things of that nature. Those are very difficult, high stress decisions. We help make sure that you achieve a winning outcome. I'm not hard to find on social media. My handle is generally unblakeable. I post on LinkedIn regularly. I have a YouTube channel now called Your Business Value. We have 86 subscribers, so give me to 100 so I can actually customize it.
Yay.
And I'm very easy to reach that way. Oh, and I guess mblake@highscorestrategies.com is my email, but nobody uses email anymore.
Yeah. And I would encourage you folks to subscribe, follow Mike, connect with him on LinkedIn because you're always putting out diamonds on LinkedIn for folks.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, always deliver lots of value. So thank you for that. And thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
Folks, also, we want to thank you for joining us on the Price and Value Journey. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with others. And if you're not already a subscriber, you can find the show on your favorite podcast app. If you work as a consultant, coach, accountant, attorney, or you're in any other expertise-based business and you're finding challenges in communicating the value you provide to clients, positioning yourself, developing your business, or setting prices, I wrote a book with you in mind. It's called The Generosity Mindset, A Journey to Business Success by Raising Your Confidence, Value, and Prices. And you can learn more about the book and where to buy it at thegenerositymindset.com. And if you want to move a little faster in changing your business for the better, instead of just reading the book and you want to chat about working with me directly, you can email me at johnray.co and feel free to use that same email to offer feedback on the show and guest suggestions and questions I can answer in a future episode. On behalf of Mike Blake, I'm John Ray. Join us next time on the Price and Value Journey.